Hello again. This is Chris from Just UX Design to give you a brief demo in Axure. So I've used a lot of rapid prototyping tools, and Axure is definitely my go-to, mostly because it gives you the greatest level of interactivity in your prototypes. That level of interactivity isn't always necessary, but when you do need to use a test or demonstrate a very specific interaction, Axure is awesome. A lot of people are put off by how complicated Axure can seem at first glance, and to be honest, they're right in some ways. When you first get started with it, the software can be a bit of a beast, but once you get your head around the little niggles, you won't look back. This walkthrough is just going to give you a very quick tour of some of Axio's more clever features, including conditions, repeaters, filters, and variables. But don't freak out because we're going to go through everything step by step. And we're going to do it through the lens of a specific component. So today, we are going to make a predictive search box. So we've all used this before, and on any site with a lot of content, these are a necessity. So we've got our search bar here on this website, and you'll notice that when I first start typing into it, a list of predictions appears. And as I type, the predictions change and refine. Now, this isn't exactly rocket science, and this interaction is fairly common on the web. However, if we're designing a website that search is a very important component of it, this is a really important piece of interactivity and one that we'd want to make clear in our prototype so that we can test it and so that our teams can understand exactly how this needs to work and be built. So what I'd like to do is take you through how we can build this using Axure. So let's get to it. So here we are in our brand spanking new Axure file. We're going to just focus on building the search bar itself at this stage. So let's just start off with the basic widgets we'll need. I'm going to make the libraries a little bit bigger just so you can see, and I'm going to hide the masters because we won't really be using that for this demo. So we'll need 3 widgets to do this. We will need a box, we will need a text field, and we will need a little magnifying glass icon. Now for this I'm using the Font Awesome widget library, but anything will do really. You can even just copy and paste an image of a magnifying glass from Google and that will do the trick. It's just to make it a little bit prettier. So let's start by naming our widgets because that's just a good practice to get into and it helps us know what we're talking about when we're building our events. So our box I'm going to call search BG. My text field I'm going to call search field, and our magnifying glass I'm just going to call search icon. So let's start with our box. Let's make it the right kind of size. That'll probably do. And then in the style tab, let's just make it add a bit of a corner radius on it. And let's just make the line color a little bit lighter. And let's add a very slight shadow on it, just to give it a little bit of affordance to show you that it can be clicked. Maybe that's not a bit too much there. Let's try that again. 2, 2, 2, that'll do. So inside that box is where we want to put our text input, our search field. Now the reason we're doing this is because Axure doesn't give you that much flexibility as to how you can style text input fields. And because we want this to look a little bit more realistic, we're going to put it inside of that box, which is like our background. So I'm going to drop that there. I'm just going to make it fill the right space, and I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to hit hide border, which makes it basically invisible. So that's the text field in there sitting inside this other box. And this is really just to make it a little bit more realistic, to give it some padding and a little drop shadow and rounded corners, which we normally wouldn't be able to do to a text field. And let's put our search icon in there too. There we go. Let's just make that a little lighter. Right, okay, that looks good. Let's just give this a font. We'll give it Helvetica 16. And that looks all right. So we've got our free widgets. I'm going to select all of them and I'm going to group them. So you can either right click and hit group, or if you're on a PC, Control G, or if you're on a Mac, Command G. That puts them all into a group, and I'm going to call this group search field. Now, what we want to do is add what I'm going to call an active state to our search field. This basically lights the search field up when the user starts typing in it. The point is to make it really obvious to the user when the search field is in focus. Now, what we're really going to be doing here is adding an interactive style to the background here, a selected state. Let me just flip back to the example and I'll show you what that looks like. So here we have our our search bar, and you'll see that when the user puts their focus inside it, the color changes slightly, just to indicate that it's been selected. And we want to simulate that effect. So we go on to our group, and inside that group we select the background, the box. And I'm going to right click it, and I'm going to click Interaction Styles. Now what I want to do here is add a selected state. So interaction styles are ways of just changing the styling of a widget slightly depending on what state it's in. And the state we want to look at is selected. So I'm going to tab over to the selected state. By default, all of these are going to be empty. The only one I'm going to look at today is the line color, which I'm going to make this sort of black here. Now what that will do is it will mean that when this background is in its selected state, it will give it that black border. So now we need to tell Axure when to put it into the selected state and when not to. And to do that, we need to put an event on our search field, our text field. So in our search field, click on the text field widget, go to properties, and now we can see our events that we can build. And the one we want to talk about today is focus, on focus. Because what we want to tell to Axure is when the user puts their focus on the search field, put the selected state of the background here, the box, to true. So we double click on the on focus event for our search field, and that brings up our case editor. Now on the left here, we've got all of these different kinds of interactions we can have. And the only one we want to look at is set selected. So set selected, search background was the name of our background widget. So we check that, that's the one we're talking about. And we want to set it to the value of true. So what you see here, what we've basically done is said, when the user puts the focus on the text field, set the selected state of search background to true. Now, what we also need to do is the reverse of this, which is to say when they take their focus out of the text field, we switch it off. We turn the selected state of the background to false. So what I can do to make this a little bit easier is highlight that case, copy it with Control C or Command C, and then paste it into lost focus. Now it's not quite the same event, so I'm going to just open that up, that copied case. And instead of being set search background to true, I want to set it to false. So there we go. When I focus on the text field, set the background to true. When I take the focus off the text field, set the background to false. So let's preview this. And you should see now that we've got our search bar here. When I put the focus on it, it lights up. And when I take the focus off, it turns off again. Lovely. Right, so now it's time to think about our predictions, our little drop down that appears when we start to type. So the behavior that we want to build is that as the user begins to type into the search box, we expand a little drop down menu of suggestions for them. So first, what we're going to do is build this drop down component as a separate entity. So I'm going to take a box from my library here. I'm going to drop it on. This is going to be the container for my predictions. So this is going to be the thing that contains all of the different search results suggestions that are going to appear. So I will call this BG or container BG, container background. I'm just going to make this a little bit lighter. So this will be the thing that pops out from below the search bar here. And what I'm now going to do is take another box. This is going to be my first prediction, if you like. So it needs to be a really big hit area, like the example we looked at, where as the user hovers over each of these, they can click anywhere within this whole row. Really big hit area, lots of padding. So we want to replicate that here. Take our box and make it about yay big. And I'm going to call that prediction. So what I'm going to do is just style this a little bit. I'm going to take the border off of it, border none, and I'm going to add some padding to it so the text does not butt right up against the left here. So I'm going to add 10 pixels of padding, and I'm going to align the text left. I'm going to make it size 16, and I'm just going to type in an example, which will be, if I can click on it, coffee table. Let's do that again. There we go. So our prediction is sitting in there as coffee table. So what we then need to add is a little hover state, so it's clear when the user is hovering over that prediction. So let's right click on it, add an interaction style. The one we want is mouse over, which is selected by default. And I'm just going to add this slightly different tint of grey. And I'll also make the font color black so it stands out a little bit more. Lovely. So now I'm just going to group these together, which is Control G or Command G, and call them predictions. Now, for the moment, there's only one prediction in here. Don't worry, we'll get to putting the rest of them in later. But for now, let's just drop that there. Let's send it to the back. So you'll see here the order of my widgets on the outline. This actually reflects what appears in front of what when we're viewing our prototype. So I want the search field to be in front of the predictions so that the predictions kind of just drops below it ever so slightly. I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger so it goes under. Okay, so let's preview this. And we'll now see our predictions sitting there. And when I hover over this one, it lights up. Super duper. Now, all we need to do is have this show or hide depending on whether or not the user is typing into the search bar. Because as we've seen in our example here, that dropdown does not appear if the user's not entered anything in. So what we want to do is add an event to our search field widget, our text field, another event. This event is going to be on text change. So what we want to do is say, as the user types into this text field, if the value they've titled is not, the value they've entered into the search field is not nothing, so if they've entered something in there, then we want to show our predictions widget. So I'm going to double click on the text change event. And now this is where we're going to start talking about conditions. So if you look up here, you'll see this add condition button. Now, as a condition is basically us saying to Axure, we need you to check for something to be true before you do this event. So click on the add condition button. And Axure's quite clever because it usually puts a default in, which is probably what you're going to want. In this case, they're absolutely spot on, which is if the text on widget this being the search field, equals value of blank, then do this. Now, that's not quite right, because what we want to do is say, if the text on widget this does not equal the value of blank or nothing, okay, let's put that in there. Then we want to show the predictions group. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is just copy and paste that same event, that same case. So we've got two in there now, two cases. That second case will be what happens if this isn't true. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to edit the condition because right now it's exactly the same as the first one because we copied and pasted it. Edit the condition, and I'm going to change that to equals. So if the text on this does equal 0, then where we were once showing the predictions group, I now want to hide it. So you can see here we have an interaction on text change with two cases. This means that two different things could happen depending on whether or not this criteria is met. Now, one last thing we've got to do is hide this widget, the predictions group, set hidden. And now by default, this will be hidden. So I'm going to preview this one more time. And here's our search field. We put the focus on it. Our little selected state lights up on the background. And now as I begin to type, the predictions appear. However, if I remove the text, the predictions disappear. So we've got the basis for our interaction here. Now what we have to do is put in some actual information to this dropdown. So to get these search predictions working properly and with some real or at least some dummy content in them, we need to add what's called a repeater. So repeaters are one of the trickier parts of Axure to get your head around, but once you do, they'll make your prototype so much more realistic. So as the name suggests, a repeater is a way of having many of the same element repeated multiple times. We can take one step further though, and then add in the data for every instance of that repeater. So we get essentially real data into our prototype en masse. That sounds a little bit funky, but you'll see what I mean when we start doing it. So I'm going to add a repeater. So you'll find them in the libraries down here, right at the bottom, buried away, the complex feature. I'm going to drag that in. And this is what a repeater looks like by default. A little bit weird, huh? So what a repeater works a bit like a dynamic panel or a master, if you're familiar with either of those. Once I click into it, I can see the contents of that repeater in a separate view. So right now I am inside that repeater that I just double clicked on. I can get back out of this by hitting home. So you'll see that the repeater, like a dynamic panel or a master, is kind of like a wireframe in your wireframe. So the default view of a repeater, or like what it gives you by default, is literally just a rectangle in the repeater, just a rectangle. And you'll see that when we go back out of it, there's a 1, a 2, and a 3, and there's 3 of them. That's because the default repeater is configured to have 3 rows. Now the column here has been called column, and there are 3 rows on it, 1, 2, and 3. So what it's doing is creating 3 instances of the content in that repeater. So we'll get a little bit more into this in a moment, but for now, what I want to do is go into our predictions group, copy that prediction widget, just the prediction, and I'm going to go inside my repeater, which I'm also going to give a name. I'm going to call it predictions. I'm going to go inside that repeater. I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to paste in our prediction widget, which I'm going to put right up in the top left-hand corner at 0, 0. So when I go back to home, what I can now see is that my predictions widget is 3 instances of that individual prediction, 1, 2, 3, because there are 3 rows in the properties of that repeater. If I added a 4th row, you can see that, like magic, a 4th one has been added in. Add a 5th, boom, 5 in there now. And I can use these little buttons to kind of copy paste, move them around, delete them. There we go, fairly self-explanatory. What I'm going to do is rename this column, which has just been called column by default. I'm going to change it to say value. And then in each of these, I am actually going to add in some content. So I'm going to make this first one say coffee table. I'm going to make the second one say glass table. I'm going to make the third one say wood table. Now you see this hasn't actually done anything in my view of the repeater here. Even though I've added these values in, nothing's happened. And that's because we need to just tweak this event here on our predictions widget. So you'll see when I'm selecting my predictions widget, my repeater, in the properties here, there's an on item load event. There's one in by default. Now, what I'm going to do is double click on this to go into it. And what it's basically saying is on loading each instance of the repeater, so each row, set text, and then there's actually nothing configured yet. So what I want to do is click on the prediction widget in the predictions repeater. So you'll see that that prediction widget that I put in the repeater is nested in the repeater here. So predictions repeater contains my box that I made, that I pasted in there called prediction. I want to check that. Now by default, it's just going to say coffee table. That's not what I want to do because this would name all of them coffee table. What I actually want to do is clear that. This box here, what I want to set it to, needs to be the value in this instance of the repeater, this row. So that sounds a little confusing, but Axure helps you out by giving you this little FX button. So click on that. Now this is Axure's little window for helping you build functions and variables. So what I'm going to do is just click on this link here that says insert variable or function. And you'll see that right up at the top here, there'll be this item.value selection. This is the value column for this item. And that's what I want. Okay, so you'll see that on item load, what I'm doing is setting the text on that widget to be equal to the value, value column of this instance, this item. So when I hit OK, you'll see straight away that it's now, for each of the items, updating the text inside to reflect that value in my repeater. And if I add more of them, so we'll call this marble table. It'll add it straight in with the right text. Repeaters are really powerful because rather than having to have loads and loads of widgets cluttering up your prototype and having to move stuff around, this will just let you add in as many things as you want. So the last thing I'm going to do is our repeater is kind of sitting on its own at the moment. It's not really attached to anything. I'm going to copy the repeater we've made, copy the predictions repeater. Actually, I'm going to cut it. I'm going to copy it and delete it, and I'm going to put it inside my predictions group, replacing that individual predictions widget. So I'm going to delete that and paste in that repeater that we put in. I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger to accommodate it. There we go. So when I preview my prototype now, we've got our repeater in there with real information in it. Now, repeaters can contain as many values as you like. I've worked on prototypes where there's literally been hundreds of rows in a repeater. That's generally overkill, and you don't need that much, but it does help make user testing more realistic if you wanted to import your entire collection of content. So if you had 100 or 200 or 1,000 different search terms that you wanted to stick into here, you could. And Axure offers you some options for importing values, and it also copies and pastes in very easily from Excel. So if you have a big list of things from Excel, if you highlight all of those cells, Control-C, Control-V them into here, they paste in very nicely. But for now, I'm just going to add in some made-up things. So I'm just going to type in a few random values. Now you'll notice that this repeater is getting longer and longer and longer, and it is rapidly outgrowing the size of the container. So what we can also do is, in our style tab for the repeater, add in pagination. Now pagination just basically means that you want to split this over multiple pages. In this case, I want items per page to be 5. So by default, it's just gonna, by default, it's going to show the first 5 things in here. The rest of them are still in the repeater, but it's only showing the first 5. There are lots of things you can do with repeaters. You can put next and previous buttons if you want. But what we're doing here is actually we want to be searching and filtering through these based on the value that's been entered into our text field here. So this is where we're going to get a little bit complicated, but bear with us. So what we want to do is have Axure take the string or the value that I put into my text field widget and use that to search the contents of the repeater and filter this stuff on the fly, just like it does on the real website. Right, this is the last bit. We need to add what's called a filter to our repeater. Each time the user changes the text in our search field text input widget, we want to filter the contents of our repeater to only show stuff that corresponds to what's been entered. So this is where we get our first little taste of filtering a repeater. So what we want to do is put in another interaction onto our search field widget. And this is also going to be on text change. So where we've already got our event that says on text change, if the text that I'm entering into the search field does not equal nothing, show the predictions, and I also want to apply this filter to my repeater. So I'm going to click on that case, and I'm going to keep that where it is, and I'm going to add something else afterwards. So in my left-hand panel here, you'll see a group of interactions all about repeaters. And the one that I want is add filter. So first we choose which repeater we want to apply it to. Now our prototype only has one repeater in it, predictions, so that's the one I want. And you'll see remove other filters. Let's just leave that checked. It doesn't really matter for this prototype we're building, but good practice, let's just leave it checked. Now we give this filter a name. We can call it anything we want, but we'll call it search. And this is where we build our repeater using a formula, a rule. Now, anyone used to using Excel or anything like that will probably be used to the way this works. Axure makes it a little bit easier by giving you that little FX button, which you can click, and this helps you to find variables. So the first thing that you'll want to do is add a local variable. A local variable is something that Axure remembers just for this specific interaction, and then after the interaction it's forgotten. That's the opposite of a global variable, where something is remembered throughout the entire prototype between pages, and it's just remembered forever. I won't go into global variables right now, but I would recommend having a look when you get a chance. But for now, let's add a local variable. So we add one in. By default, it gives it the name lvar1, which is fine, we can keep that. And by default, it's the text on widget this, which is exactly what we want. Axure is quite smart, and it knows that we're probably wanting to store a local variable of the content that's been entered into that search field. So it's guessed what we needed, and it is correct. So lvar1, which is our local variable, is the text on the widget this being the input field. So this box here is where we are going to build our formula. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit and flick over Blue Peter style, for the Brits among you, to this example that I've built earlier. Now this is going to seem really complicated to a lot of you, but don't worry, because I'll paste it into the comments for this video. And I'm going to throw my hands up and say that this is complicated, but quite often when I'm building formulas in Axure, you can just hit Google up and find someone else who's done the same thing and copy paste it. But let me explain how this works. So this is our formula. What I am doing is I am taking the item.value, that is the value column of this particular item, so the suggestion name in our repeater, so coffee table, glass table, wooden table, whatever. I'm converting that to lowercase, I'll tell you why in a minute, and we are querying against that index of lvar1. lvar1 is the local variable that corresponds to the text in our search field, which has been also converted to lowercase. And then that's our little formula there for comparing them. So this whole formula is just taking the text in our text field, in our search field, and querying it against the value of all of the items in our repeater. The reason we convert both of them to lowercase is so that this whole thing is case insensitive. So if the user enters a capital letter in the search box, but our repeater value does not have a capital letter, that doesn't matter. So capital letters are taken out of the equation by converting both of these to lowercase first. So I'm just going to copy and paste this whole thing in, and you can do the same. I'm going to put that into there. So item.value to lowercase, index of lvar1, lvar1 being the text on the widget, and compare them against each other. That is the filter that I want to have. So I only want to be showing items where lvar1 is in the item value. Okay, so that filter has been added into that case. So on text change, show the predictions and apply that filter to our repeater. Now, one last thing, which is on that other case where we hide the predictions if the text on this widget equals 0 or null or nothing, I also want to remove the filter. I don't necessarily need to do this because it's being hidden anyway, but it's just good practice and it's just good to get in the habit of removing your filters when you don't need them. So I'm going to hit the remove filter on the left hand side on predictions, and I'm just going to hit remove all filters. That was why we named our filter earlier, by the way. If I just wanted to remove one specific filter, which was search, the name of the filter that we made, I can. That is important if we wanted to be applying more than one filter to the repeater, but in this case we don't, and to make it simple I'm just going to remove all of them. So let's preview this and see how it works. Preview. This is where I look really silly if it doesn't work. There we go. So our filter is taking all of the items in our repeater, and it is only showing the ones that contain the text in our input field there. Magic. So now if we are user testing, the user can go up to this search bar, they can type in whatever they want, share, and they can get all of the values out of their search predictions that contain share. It works, it is realistic, and it allows you to simulate exactly how this functionality is going to work. Super. One last little thing, and that is what happens if we click on stuff, because right now in our prototype I could click on marble chair and nothing happens. It's not linked up to anything. Now if in my repeater, so let's go back into the predictions repeater, if on that prediction box in there, the prediction, the inner contents, I can add a on-click event, a very simple one. If you've been using Axure for a little while, you will know this one already. Open link, and then I can open the page I want. So page 1. Now, important to note that whilst clicking this will go to that page, this will be the behavior that applies to all of the predictions. So no matter what the user selects, it will always go to the same page. If we want to add different pages for each of the items in our suggestions, which we may want to, I've worked with some prototypes where we have built loads and loads and loads of pages out, and we've wanted them to go to the right pages in our prototype for the benefit of user testing or whatever. We can do that. What we do is on our repeater, our predictions repeater, we add another column in, which we do by giving it a name. I'm going to call it destination. So now we've got two columns in our repeater. One is the value, which is the name of it, the suggestion itself, and the other is the destination. So rather than just typing into this, what I can do is right-click on the cell and click Import Page. Oh, sorry, no, Reference Page. I can click Reference Page. And when I click Reference Page, my Axure sitemap, my list of wireframes will pop up, and I can pick on the specific page that I want to be associated to that row in the repeater. So let's say hypothetically that I built out a wireframe for each of these pages uniquely. I could have each one reference that wireframe. One last thing, this won't happen automatically. I've got to hook it up just like I had to with putting the value text onto the widget there. In this case, what I want to do is double click on the repeater, click on the inner widget, so the prediction itself, and then on the onClick event, rather than just opening up page 1, what I want to do is click on the radio button down there that says link to an external URL or file. Get rid of that. Click the lovely little FX thing that we've gotten so used to. Insert variable or function. And then just like how we hit item value to put the name of this individual item in there, we hit item destination, which is the reference to the right page, the right wireframe in our Axure file. So now what's this done is says that on click, open the page that is in the item.destination, the destination column for this item, and open that in this current window. So what that should do is for coffee table, it will link to page 1, for glass table, it will link to page 2, for wood table, it will link to page 3, etc. So there you have it. This is how we create a very realistic interaction in our Axure prototypes for a predictive search. I hope you found this useful. If you have any other questions or comments, or you're getting stuck, feel free to pop a comment onto this YouTube video and I will try and help you out. If you want some more tutorials or articles or just me waffling a load of silly bollocks, go to justuxdesign.com and I will chuck the Axure file as it is right now onto a link on that site too, so that you can download it and play with it if you like. Enjoy, thank you very much, and happy prototyping.